Good afternoon, good afternoon. My name is Liam Burrow, and for the first time in quite a while, we are live at the Waterhole. What an enormous pleasure it is to be starting the show today here at Stony Point, Betty's Bay, with something perhaps not all too often seen. These are little rock hyraxes. Very, very, very cool. Hear that ocean absolutely raging behind us. This part of South and Southern Africa's coastal region is famed for some pretty violent seas, a very chilly ocean, lots of wind. But this little hyrax seems to have found itself a nice little spot out of the wind, and it's not alone. Now, before we kick things off today, I'd like to remind you that we do try and keep these shows as interactive as possible. So please keep your questions coming throughout the program. I will be waiting to hear from you. Yeah, let's talk all things wild. This really is such a cool close-up view of these little hyraxes. And now you'd be forgiven for thinking that they're actually like a rodent, some sort of guinea pig or sort of relative of the porcupine, something like that. But in actual fact, their closest relatives are actually elephants, quite bizarrely. You'd be forgiven for thinking it would be literally anything else. But in fact, they share a very similar foot structure. X-rays of elephant feet when compared to hyrax feet reveal almost exactly the same structure of those bones, and the hyraxes even have a little set of tusks in their upper jaw. They're not really visible unless it sort of arches its lips a little bit. They are, after all, only tiny things. But yeah, really quite bizarre. And not something we see an awful lot of across much of the kind of Sabi Sand, Greater Kruger area. And they do occur out there in certain spots. I have seen them on pridelands. But yeah. Caitlin Boss says, "Hello Liam, this creature looks like a quokka. It's so cute." Caitlin, absolutely, they do look a bit quokka adjacent. I speak under correction. I think quokkas are marsupials. They're definitely from a part of Australia. They are the little sort of furry animals that are famous for presenting themselves for selfies on Rottnest Island. Yeah, they've got these sort of very cute little smiley expressions. And very, very thick, quite wiry fur, which helps with kind of thermoregulation and insulation, something very necessary on this Cape Coast. It gets awfully wet, very chilly, very windy, often for weeks at a time down there. So these guys have got to be prepared to deal with some pretty tough conditions. But just having a bit of a lounge around today by the looks of things. My late grandmother actually hand-raised a little hyrax. I'm not sure under what circumstances exactly, but a unique fact of hyrax behavior is that they always visit the bathroom in the same place. So she managed to train this little hyrax to sort of do its business in a little bowl, and then she would go to the bathroom in the house, tip it into the toilet, and flush it all away. But I think this hyrax started to associate the bathroom, the actual bathroom in the house, with the scent of its own doings, and it kind of cut out the middleman. It eventually learned how to sort of do what it needed to do in the toilet. But unfortunately, one day she was away, and that little hyrax fell into the loo itself and died. Not ideal. They are such funny looking things. Catherine, thanks very much for your message. Awesome. I do believe that there are quite a few around the town of Phalaborwa. A bit bizarre that you see them in town. That's amazing. You say you see them climbing trees out there. That's very, very interesting. I think you might actually be seeing tree hyrax out there. I believe these are rock hyrax, two distinct subspecies, but very similar, visually at least. And Library Lady, thank you very much for the welcome. It's good to be back. It has certainly been a while, some months at least. And then there were three. So these rock hyraxes are highly gregarious animals. They live in huge family groups. In the right habitat, there could be 40 or 50 in a family, all sort of snuggling up together in rock crevices. Something which I'm sure helps to keep them warm on very, very chilly, windy nights on the coast down here. Lots of itching and scratching. I'm sure these guys have got fleas. Something pretty unavoidable when you've got these sort of furry little animals all living in very close contact with one another. Alrighty, well I think at this point we will probably leave our little hyraxes all snuggled up here on the coast. Let's head now to Victoria Falls Sky for something completely different. Wowza. So that is one very large collection of vultures there. A bit tough to see exactly what they're feeding on. That looks like predominantly white-backed. White-backed, a couple of hooded vultures kind of on the periphery there. Also a very large marabou stork, another bird that feeds exclusively on carrion or rotting meat. This is actually the first time I've had a look at this sky camera here at Victoria Falls. but I'm no stranger to the area. I was actually born in Zimbabwe, where we are at the moment. Thanks very much for your comment there, Lenny. Very, very good to hear from you, and great to be back. Absolutely. I shared kind of a tiny clip of that incredible sighting at Rosy's Pan to my Instagram story this morning. Wasn't that sighting just unbelievable? Totally unexpected. And essentially, that is all part of the deal here at Live at the Waterhole. You just never know what you're going to get. But once again, the beauty of having so many different feeds in so many different locations is that we always have something to look at. And variety, after all, is the spice of life. So I'm not entirely informed, but I believe this must be something like a Vulture restaurant. I wonder if food isn't being put out for these birds of prey at this location. I think it almost certainly is. Just looking at how that soil is kind of compacted down. Yeah, it might seem slightly unethical to some to be putting out food for wildlife, but in the particular case of these vultures, we've really got to give them every extra bit of help that we can. Vultures across much of their range are in real trouble. There's lots of different factors coming into it, but power lines are killing them. They're very large birds, so an impact with an electrical cable will almost certainly break their wings. They also fly into wind turbines, and they're suffering enormously at the moment from poisoning. So yeah, there is quite a demand for vulture body parts in the traditional medicine trade in Africa. And unfortunately, it's well documented out there that people will poison a carcass. Vultures have phenomenal eyesight. They can see something dead out in the bush from miles away, often from 10 or 15,000 feet up into the air. They start to orbit, they come down, gorge themselves on that meat, and they're poisoned in huge numbers. Then sangomas or witch doctors will come in and kind of dispatch these vultures, cutting off their feet, their heads, for use in, again, traditional medicine. Very sad. And vultures are the cleanup crew of the bush. They're an essential element in preventing the spread of disease and cleaning up all the dead, decaying meat and kind of carcasses, bodies out there. Without them, the bush is a very different landscape. Lots of squabbling. It looks like not everybody got their feed today. They really are massive birds. It's a bit difficult to give you a good idea of the scale there, but that one just taking off, that's a white-backed vulture. And it's got a wingspan of something like 1.8 meters, almost sort of the height of a door. Yeah, and they can weigh something like 7 or 8 kilos, so huge birds, the size of a sort of a domestic turkey. Hello, Stephen. Thank you very much for your question there. So Stephen has asked, how do you tell the difference between Cape vultures and whiteback vultures? They look quite similar. Stephen, you're exactly right. They are extremely similar. The Cape is a little bit bigger, but for myself, viewing vultures at carcasses, virtually the easiest way to tell the difference is to look at the eye. So a whiteback vulture has a dark eye, almost pitch black. The Cape vulture has a very, very yellow iris. So probably the easiest way to actually tell the difference if there is any doubt. Yeah, we should see Cape vultures in this area as well. And they range across much of Zimbabwe, Zambia, Botswana, as well as certain parts of South Africa as well. Incredibly, I read a story about a Cape vulture down in South Africa's Cape region that was actually hit by a car. Thankfully, it was picked up by somebody pretty wildlife conscious and managed to take it to a rehabilitation center. I think it had a broken wing, but they rehabbed this thing, looked after it, got it to the point where it could sort of fend for itself again, fitted it with a little tracker, released it somewhere down in the Cape, and 24 hours later, it was 2,500 kilometers away in Limpopo, way up in South Africa's sort of northeasternmost corner. Yeah, a testament to kind of the long-range abilities of these birds and the distances that they cover. But pretty staggering. 2,500 k's is a long journey for a human in a car, let alone doing it under sort of your own power with your own wings. The secret to that, though, is the vulture's ability to kind of manage air currents. So they do very, very little work, and they get themselves into kind of an optimum channel of air sort of flowing in the right direction. They can reach speeds of up to 100 kilometers an hour, and they quite literally cross countries. Lenny has asked, did you get your commercial pilot's license yet? Lenny, the process is ongoing. I am 7 exams in, so 7 exams done, 2 to go. So really, really hoping to have it finished in hopefully the next 2 or 3 months, the exam side anyway. But yeah, it has been a mammoth task. I knew it was going to be big, but had no idea it was going to be this massive. But getting there, it'll be worth it when it's done, and then hopefully off to do some conservation flying somewhere into Africa. That's the dream anyway. But thanks, Lenny. I hope you're well. You can see quite a few of these vultures starting to kind of relax now. They've found little spots in the shade. And yeah, just doing a bit of digesting. Hey, Martin, thanks very much for the message. Nice to have you live as well. Yeah, I hope all is well at Bamanangu. These vultures are quite amazing. They will absolutely gorge themselves on meat, often well over 1 kilo of meat at a time. Keeping in mind the entire vulture's body only weighs about 7 kilos. But they feed to the point where they're actually literally too heavy to take off. So in some cases, they're pretty vulnerable. They've actually got to sit on the ground for a number of hours and do some digestion to lighten the load before they can actually get off the ground. Pretty amazing. Yeah, there is absolutely nothing left there on the ground. Whatever they started with is down to just a couple of bigger bones. Stacey, good afternoon. You've asked, do they ever practice cannibalism? So it wouldn't surprise me, Stacey. Certainly they will feed on pretty much anything that is dead and is available. But personally, myself, I've never seen a vulture feeding on the body of another vulture. And generally, sure, that's very cool. I wonder if somebody hasn't chucked out a bit more meat or something. Isn't that sound just prehistoric? That's a call from a whiteback vulture for sure. Things can get very, very heated in these sort of flocks when there is meat available. Lots of biting and scratching, and their bills are pretty formidable. I had an unfortunate encounter with a whiteback vulture in the western sector of the Sabi Sand. Out on a game drive with a set of guests, we came across, quite tragically, a dead whiteback vulture, a dead hooded vulture, a dead tawny eagle, all kind of in the very, very same location. Pretty clear that it had been an instance of poisoning. And then kind of in the shade of a bush, I noticed a live whiteback vulture. It hadn't died yet, but looking very, very sorry for itself. So jumped off of the vehicle with my tracker, equipped with a guest blanket. I'm expecting this vulture to struggle, sort of put this blanket over its back in an attempt to move it into a better spot where we could have a look at it, try and figure out what to do next. Picked this thing up, it just hung its head. It was so sad looking, so my heart broke, and quite foolishly I used my other hand to kind of stroke the side of its neck. I don't know what I was thinking. And this vulture latched onto my index finger on my right hand, keeping in mind they've evolved bills to cut through the leather of things like dead giraffe and through dried flesh and sinew and all sorts of things. Very, very powerful beaks. And he bit my finger down to the bone and then proceeded to regurgitate, to vomit whatever he had in his stomach all over me. So, lesson learned. But anyway, put this vulture down, radioed it in, and our conservation team managed to come out, collect this vulture. It was taken to the very well-known Moholoholo Rehabilitation Center, quite nearby, and they managed to rehabilitate this thing and actually save it. So a nice, happy ending to what could have been a very, very sad story. And yes, I did have to get a tetanus shot. They had to bring in a doctor from outside, obviously keeping in mind all of the horrendous things that are in a vulture's stomach, all of the bacteria and the germs and whatnot. I was at pretty serious risk of getting quite sick if an infection started there. So yeah. Alrighty, well, in the interest of keeping things moving, I think let's head to Timi on South Africa's east coast. Very, very nice. Things are looking so lush and so green down here at Timi. Kicking things off with a little family of warthogs. A sounder is the collective noun for warthogs. Apologies, we may have a slight breakup of the feed there. Maybe the signal is being affected by weather or something in this area. We'll keep an eye on it, see what happens. Yeah, it is looking like the rains have properly arrived in Timi. And many other parts of southern Africa are looking pretty dry for this time of year. Only a couple of days ago, I checked out a satellite image comparison for the month of March this year, compared with March of the previous year, and it really looks like night and day across southern Africa. It was way wetter last year. Certainly the effects of El Nino, perhaps even kind of pushing into La Nina here in the south. But the show's not over yet. Hopefully quite a bit more rain is set to arrive before we move into our dry season. And as I say, things in Tembe are certainly looking positive. It's looking so lush. Alrighty, apologies for that. I think the signal may have just been a little bit too weak down at Tembe. We were seeing quite a bit of breakup. We've now headed in the total opposite direction to Comfers Dam in kind of one of the northern central regions of South Africa, where we're looking at a flock of flamingos and assorted waterbirds. What a pleasure. Now, quite amazingly, this Comfers Dam is actually an artificial wetland system that was set up, I suppose, as a bit of the kind of environmental responsibility of a local mining company. But anyway, they've established this wetland as a part of their waterworks, and they've protected this entire area from things like stray cats and dogs. And it really has become a bit of a haven for, in particular, the lesser and greater flamingo. Two species that really historically have been battling with habitat destruction and perhaps even more seriously the destruction of their nesting sites across Africa. I believe there are only something like 6 or 7 places across the entire continent where these birds can breed. One of which, Lake Natron, up in Ngorongoro, a part of Tanzania, is under major threat at the moment for soda ash mining. The soil up there is very, very sodic. The whole area is extremely volcanic, and historically was anyway. Making that soil very valuable, very in demand. It's quite mineral rich, and as a result, unfortunately, quite a bit of it is being dug up and taken away. Very bad news for these flamingos. But again, much like the vultures we were looking at just a segment or two ago, these flamingos have the ability to travel huge distances to find alternate places to settle, to reproduce. So, yeah, what a pleasure they've settled somewhere where we can see them. And now once again, the secret behind the concentration of these flamingos here at Comfers Dam is algae, bizarrely enough. So very high concentrations of blue-green algae and diatoms, which are little microalgae as well, are the main food source for these lesser flamingos. It is all they can eat. And as a result of this being such a good place for them, 20 to 50,000 flamingos breed here. Historically, I believe 2007 was the first year that these flamingos actually bred here after this sort of wetland was established, and then they produced 9,000 flamingo chicks that first year. Without argument, a massive conservation success. Brenda, thanks very much for your question. You've asked, does the soil in the area affect the birds that stick around? Most certainly it does, Brenda. So perhaps not directly, but the soil and the functions of those algae are directly connected. So the algae need things that are available in those soils, salts, certain minerals, and in order to kind of undergo their own processes. And the flamingos feed directly on those algae. And now plants produce natural red, yellow, or orange pigments called carotenoids. And carotenoids are what give things like carrots their orange color. Or in turn, ripe tomatoes are turned red by the same stuff. Now, they're also found in the algae that the flamingos eat. And essentially that leads to the pink color in those feathers. Flamingos in areas where perhaps some of those nutrients are depleted, or even in captivity where they're not getting enough nutrient, their feathers kind of become a bit bleached, a bit washed out. And they become quite pale. It was originally believed that the orange color was actually coming from tiny crustaceans that they were actually feeding on. So the pigments in actual little tiny shrimps, but we now know that that's not the case. It is once again just that blue-green algae. I think in the back there, that slightly orangey looking bird that we can see might actually be a South African shell duck, which is quite a nice thing. Not something I've seen on this live at the Waterhole show. It's something I've seen quite frequently when visiting Tswalu in South Africa's Northern Cape. It's actually two. A breeding pair. I believe the female has the grey face and the male with a slightly whiter face. I may have that backwards. But they are one of the only duck species that actually breeds underground. They specialize in the use of abandoned aardvark burrows as places to nest. And I speak under correction once more, but I think James Henry was perhaps one of the first people to witness and certainly to capture live the action of a set of shell ducklings actually emerging for the first time from one of those aardvark burrows, and I think that happened at Tswalu, if memory serves. So yeah, some WildEarth viewers might remember that. Very, very cool. Nice to see a bit of variety. And you can see that greater flamingo kind of in the bottom left there, stirring up the mud, stirring up algae and sort of all of the things it's feeding on. And then with its head entirely submerged in the water, it's actually filtering. So filtering all of the useful stuff up out of that muddy water and taking it in. Okay, so I had it the opposite way around. The male shell duck is the one with the grey head, and the female has the white face. So while it's not in view at the moment, there is a specifically designed and man-made S-shaped island here at Comfort's Dam, where these flamingos are given a chance to breed out of the reach of things like rats and, once again, domestic dogs, domestic cats. And they do, of course, after all, breed on the ground. They kind of scoop up these turrets of mud. They make these little earthen platforms on which they lay an egg, or 2 eggs, and that's where they raise those chicks. Yeah, there's actually some fabulous footage of a flamingo breeding colony. I think it was in the latest David Attenborough special on the BBC. Maybe Planet Earth 3, if I've got that correct. Yeah, it'll give you a good idea, if you haven't already seen that, where these flamingos reproduce. The ever-present Egyptian geese down there as well. Plenty of coots. Now this little wetland is only about 380 hectares in size, so it's only relatively small. But once again, much further than the water and the islands themselves, the flamingos don't really need too much other room. Alrighty, I think time now to check in with whatever is happening around the waterhole at Theare. Alrighty, so live now in South Africa's northwest province, coming to you from a slightly dry looking Madikwe game reserve. Very much the home of elephants under any normal circumstances. But we will see what's happening. Maybe we can have a bit of a pan around. The water level does seem to be quite low. I think again, staying in the vein of Southern Africa, not having had marvelous rainfall, not really to the level that we're used to this particular year. But again, as I say, the season is still young. And you can see those isolated cumulus clouds, those very fluffy, flat-bottomed clouds there. There is moisture in the air, so under the right conditions, more rain could certainly fall. Water, after all, in Africa is life. So in the absence of water, life starts to battle. Speak of the devil, there's an elephant. Ooh. Again, apologies for the slightly jumpy feed there. Alrighty, I think we've had to leave Madikwe and that was just a bit too shaky. But yeah, back up into my neck of the woods, Rosy's Pan here in Olifants West, just outside the town of Hoedspruit, which was actually the location of that live wild dog kill that we witnessed a number of months ago. A couple of you may remember that. And that happened on a very, very overcast, quite quiet day at Live at the Waterhole. We just weren't expecting it. I believe Jarrett was directing. And then, I was rambling off about birds or something on one of the other feeds. Jarrett did kind of a crash cut or a quick link. And we had wild dogs chasing an impala around the inside of this little pan. It was unreal. Brutal, but very, very, very exciting. Doesn't look like a whole lot going on here at Rosy's. A couple of starlings coming down to drink by the looks of things. Starlings and waxbills. Those are the smaller birds there. Yeah, blue waxbill, a couple of firefinches. In the time that I've been kind of not doing these Live at the Waterhole shows, we've obviously changed something with the rigging that now allows me to hear kind of all that you are hearing, all of the bird calls, which previously wasn't the case. It really is such a marvelous change. Sound is such an essential element of kind of absorbing what you're actually looking at in nature. Yeah, it's one of the big joys of being out in the bush, is listening to the environment. That does look like a Cape glossy starling, which has just exited. This section of kind of the furthest western part of the Baluli Game Reserve is particularly dry. So this really is a little oasis out in the sticks for many, many species. Alrighty, well, in the absence of anything really seriously to chat about here, I think we're going to check out a clip of some lions from as early as last night at Old Donyo in Kenya. Sure, how fantastic is that? Two big black-maned male lions enjoying a bit of water. As I say, this was only last night up at Old Donyo in northern Kenya. And one of my absolute favorite places to check in at Live at the Waterhole. What a highlight. Whoa! Oh, check it out. How's that for a surprise? So once again, if there is any doubt as to who the boss is out in the bush, and the lion might be the king of the jungle in the movies, but in reality, the elephant is the boss. A very nice big boy there. Well, thank you very much for that clip, Old Donyo. Superb. Hello, Marilyn. Thanks very much for your comment. I'm very, very glad to be back as well. And not too many interesting sightings or travels at all while I've been away. In the last couple of months, I've had my nose buried in my commercial pilot's license studies, which have progressed nicely. I will admit to suffering from a very, very, very serious dose of cabin fever, though. Coming from kind of a career out in the bush, doing safaris, traveling all over the place, looking at interesting things, it's come as a very serious adjustment. It hasn't all been fun, but hopefully it'll be over in the next couple of weeks. and I can get back out into the bush. Yeah, for myself, and I think for probably many of you at home, having kind of access to nature and nature to some degree in your life every day, it's kind of a godsend. It's part of what I need to stay healthy, mentally, physically. Yeah, and I think it is something of a testament to this show as well. It's a very valuable connection between man and nature for many people who simply don't have the ability, living in cities, living in sort of all corners of the globe, to actually access nature every day. So yeah, long live WildEarth. Things looking very, very dry here at Rosy's as well. It looks like a dove of some sort, perhaps a laughing dove coming down, shooting off there. Another little dove coming down. So these doves live in this very arid kind of wooded savanna landscape, but they're highly reliant on access to water. That was actually an emerald spotted wood dove, so a very nice tiny dove species that lives out here. But they've got to be quite careful coming down to the water. Some of their greatest predators lurk around these areas, things like birds of prey, in particular goshawks, falcons like the lanner and the peregrine, and even unseen dangers below the surface. Our serrated hinged terrapin, which lives in waterholes and rivers across much of the lowveld, is an omnivore, and given any opportunity, it will happily grab something like a dove by the foot, drag it into the water, and consume it much like a crocodile does. So yeah, the doves are quite flighty, quite skittish. This kind of Rosy's Pan area has very special significance to me. I actually began my guiding journey, my field guiding journey in this area. So working for a little tiny luxury lodge called Sausage Tree Camp. I think I spent maybe 2 or 3 years guiding up in this kind of region. So I've visited Rosy's Pan in person multiple times, had incredible sightings in the area. Yeah, it was very much kind of the place I found my feet as a field guide, and learnt a lot of the valuable lessons that I carried into kind of the rest of my career. Yeah, it's a very special part of the world. It has an enormous section of the magnificent Olifants River, hence the name Olifants West Game Reserve, kind of as its boundary to the north. So just the most incredible scenes. Huge pods of hippos, Pell's fishing owls. Got my first sighting of a Pell's there. Big prides of lions. Yeah, it's a magnificent area. Alrighty, I think we're going to give Timi another bash, so let's head over to South Africa's east coast and see if the feed is perhaps a little more stable there. So once again back in a very green and lush looking Timi, still with a couple of warthogs. Oh, it still looks a little jittery, but we will keep an eye on it. Again, these feeds can be affected by all sorts of things, but the weather does seem to kind of play its part. Let's see what happens. Just see a warthog tail swishing there and his back in the dip. Also evidence of a bit of mud rubbed onto that very pale looking termite mound. I would say a warthog scratching post. Yeah, Timi is pretty special. You may have seen kind of just as we were coming live there. Its exact location is kind of in a little horn behind Swaziland, directly underneath Mozambique. It actually forms a corridor, which historically would have been a massive elephant migration route from further north, from regions such as Mozambique down south into the southernmost parts of Africa. A lot of that has changed, unfortunately, with the kind of erection of fences and more serious borders and that would have come with a developing human world. But yeah, there is still an enormous amount of elephant movement, and to some degree elephant movement even in between those countries. So those are routes that have to be protected. Sure, that green floating stuff is not great. I believe that might actually be one of the water hyacinths, which is an alien invasive species. That's very, very bad news. Yeah, as you can see, that stuff forms an absolute carpet, a solid blanket across the entire surface of the water, and chokes out pretty much all of the life beneath the surface. It comes from South America, and it is yeah, almost impossible to get rid of. South Africa is having enormous issues with it in parts of the Vaal Dam at the moment. Yeah, I don't think this is water hyacinth itself, but it does look to be one of the water cabbages. I wonder if Timi is doing anything to sort that out. It is very, very difficult, as I say, to get rid of. I believe there are now sprays that target this species specifically that can be dropped from a helicopter or kind of sprayed from a crop spraying type airplane. So maybe they can get that done in the future. It certainly is pretty bad. Brenda, you've asked, as a guide, if I've ever been in a situation where I've had to use a rifle. Thankfully, in my entire 12 years working as kind of a full-time safari guide, leading walks sort of every day or every other day, and there was only one situation where I honestly came very close to actually using my rifle. Unfortunately, it was my first month as a guide on a walk at a little private reserve outside the town of Hoedspruit. Our group was stalked by a pair of hand-raised lions, one of which unfortunately jumped onto one of the ladies that I was actually guiding, bit her on the top of the head, and took her down onto the ground. Really, really frightening stuff. And for myself, as sort of a very early 20s field guide, completely new to the industry, no real experience at all, absolutely terrifying. The situation was so bad, I actually realized I couldn't shoot this lion to get it off of this lady, because at such close proximity with an enormously high caliber rifle, there's a 416 Rigby, with sort of rounds of ammunition as big as your index finger, that if I had shot at that distance, a bullet could quite easily have traveled through that lion and into the guest. So I proceeded to smack this lion as hard as I could with the butt of the rifle and managed to get it off. And thankfully this woman survived. With some injury though. Yeah, as I say, pretty harsh, but I guess fairly essential lesson to learn. Respect for the wildlife. And avoid captive animals and any interactions with captive animals at all costs. If you want to view wildlife, it should be out in the bush, in nature. But yeah, nobody died, and I left with an interesting story to tell. Thanks for the question, Brenda. Some wonderful examples of elephant diggings around this waterhole. You can see kind of these sort of crater-type depressions on this green grassy area. These will certainly have been spots where elephants have kind of dug in the mud in order to splash mud up onto their bodies as a part of thermoregulation. But a spin-off is that it creates these little pans, which over time and through consistent elephant use will be deepened and kind of broadened as well, and thus a natural pan is formed. Each of these little pans is a kind of a microcosm of life. There will be frogs, there's little fish, thousands of insects, terrapins, and that's obviously a place where things like birds can fish, animals can drink. Wonderful how, when it's left to its own devices without human influence, and nature is sort of self-regulating. It's both constructive and destructive in nature. And in that, it achieves some balance and some continuity as well. Yeah, these little pans all over the place here. And when things do start to dry out in the next couple of months, as we kind of transition into the dry season, this will be a real spot attracting lots of life from miles around. But no elephants to speak of, not here anyway today. Timi is famous as a very, very special genetic population of elephants, hosting some really enormous tuskers that rival even parts of East Africa and parts of Kruger in terms of of bulls with just some immense, immense tusks. Yeah, we've been fortunate with WildEarth and actually here at Live at the Waterhole to get views of a couple of immense, immense tuskers. And we have seen 1 ton at Oldonyo in northern Kenya before, and I've spent quite a bit of time at Pridelands with Ezelwini, another southern African tusker. Yeah, they are a sight to behold. Yeah, that water lettuce again is some pretty horrendous stuff. It's also very, very easily spread. The seeds, much like the plant itself, float on the water surface. So things like wading birds, ducks, that sort of thing, kind of pick up those seeds and then, of course, travel miles and miles in any direction, land at another waterhole, drop those seeds off, and they continue to spread. Now, the use of things like boats and jet skis by humans as well have to be very, very strictly monitored in South Africa's waterways, because we spread things like that water cabbage and water hyacinth all over the place as well. Taxi Lady has asked, how would fish get into an isolated pan? And that's a very, very interesting question, Taxi Lady. Thanks for asking it. Similarly, interestingly, to that water cabbage, actually, our best guess is that fish eggs are probably, in certain circumstances, attached to a wading bird's legs. And then as that bird flies to another pan, lands in the water, drops the eggs off, and the fish hatch there. In some cases, for a specific fish species like the killifish, which occurs in some parts of Mozambique, and I believe northern Botswana and Zimbabwe as well, killifish eggs will actually be trapped in the skin of things like wallowing elephants, buffalo, and rhinos, and then transported from wallow to wallow by those big heavy-bodied animals. Quite uniquely, the killifish has the ability, or its egg has the ability, to remain in kind of a state of suspended animation for perhaps years at a time. They can kind of dry out, almost desiccate, and then with the arrival of a bit of rain, the egg hatches, and it has one of the fastest life cycles of any vertebrate. And it can go from an egg to a fully developed breeding adult in as little as 6 or 8 weeks. Yeah, if you don't know what I'm talking about, a killifish is certainly worth a Google, so have a look. Beautiful, colorful things. Probably in the same family as beta fish, something like the Siamese fighter. Yeah, capable of eking out an existence in something as small as an elephant footprint full of water in the mud. Isn't nature marvelous? There's magic wherever you look. And the warthogs cashing in the background there on that bumper crop of lush green grass. Much like domestic pigs, these guys are true pigs. They're omnivores. And much of their diet is plant material, roots, grass, shoots, fruit. But under the right circumstances, they will take a bit of meat as well. I've seen them scavenging from carcasses that lions have killed. So they'll chew on carrion, they'll eat bones, and they'll probably take birds' eggs or little baby birds on the ground. Yeah, very opportunistic. Jamie, thanks for your question. You've asked, do warthogs actually control invasive plants? Warthogs could certainly feed on that water cabbage, as do things like elephants, hippos. So it is eaten by the wildlife out here. But I think at the rate it actually spreads, it's just impossible for the animals to completely eliminate it. I thought that might be an elephant, but I think it's just a very dark tree trunk there in amongst the warthogs, further to the left. Yeah. Yeah, a little family by the looks of it, possibly a sow and some almost full-grown piglets. They are quite gregarious warthogs. They often prefer to live in a group, and they will all share the space in a burrow at night. They sleep underground, often in abandoned or commandeered warthog burrow, or rather aardvark burrows, which they reverse into, I reckon, so that they can sort of face danger should a hyena or a leopard or something pitch up at the entrance. And if they are disturbed, they can shoot out with such violence that they could quite easily break a person's legs if you were stood in the wrong place. So certainly on walks we do avoid the entrances to warthog burrows, and get yourself very badly hurt should you be stood in the wrong spot. These warthogs are one of only two species of pig that we actually get indigenously in wilderness areas in southern Africa. We have the warthog that we're obviously looking at, and then we have another very, very shy, predominantly nocturnal species called the bush pig, which looks a little bit like a ginger version of the wild boar that you get in parts of Europe, and I believe introduced to parts of North America. And just as formidable in terms of temperature, or rather temperament, and its nature. They can be very, very aggressive, particularly if they're wounded by a hunter. Just having a little scan around here, a couple more warthogs. Once again, that very yellow looking water cabbage in the background. You can hear the calls of things like blue waxbills in the background. A real oasis. A couple of Egyptian geese there on the water's edge as well. And certainly lots of fish swirls in this water. I would think probably from something like a tilapia. lots of evidence of elephant wallows. You can see this sort of splashing of mud across this bare ground all over here. An elephant has definitely stood on this spot, stirred up the ground with its foot, and splashed that lovely sort of chocolate coloured mud all over its body. Oh, beautiful big butterfly there. That looks like one of the emperors. Ideally it would open its wings. I think what we've actually got here is one of the green-banded swallowtails. And they do have a white bar underneath the wings, but this sort of electric green or blue stripe on the upper surface with a very metallic shine. Yeah, this guy has just come down to suck minerals and salts off of this very damp soil. Something that we see butterflies doing basically wherever they exist. In very dry regions, they'll do the same thing even off of fresh elephant or predator dung. And there's enough to sustain them even in that. And we are very lucky here in South Africa. We've got over 800 species of butterflies here. So if you take any interest at all in the small stuff, I'm a particularly big fan of butterflies. And yeah, this is a wonderful species, or rather a wonderful place to visit. This butterfly is a very close cousin of the citrus swallowtail, which if you've got a lemon tree in your garden in a place like South Africa, you will almost definitely have the caterpillars on there. Very, very nice. Well spotted by our director at Tadiwa. Definitely some movement in there. Oh no, it's just the wind. Timi is home to things like lion, leopard and cheetah as well, so it's always worth it on a trip to the waterhole here to have a bit of a scan around some of these shady trees and dense bushes. You absolutely never know what might be lurking just sort of out of sight. You can also hear the calls of red-billed buffalo weavers in the background. think we had a chin spot batis there as well. There is life all around. Just had a look at the weather. It does look like there's a little bit of a kind of a wet front moving south down past this Timi area. So hence kind of the cloud covering this area, sun popping out, cloud coming back. And there could very well be a bit of rain coming off of that warm Mozambican channel sort of through the rest of the day and into this evening. Also an impala popping out there. Yeah, we've kind of just passed 2 o'clock, so this is the point during the day where conditions are hottest. This would be the busiest time around the waterhole on average. Yeah, a couple of impala moving across there. And a couple of really magnificent woolly necked storks have arrived there as well, quite aptly named. They do look like they have a bit of a woolly white sock or something kind of pushed down over their heads and necks. And much like these impalas, they just seem to be luxuriating in the sun, doing a bit of basking and grooming. This is the perfect place for necked storks to kind of wander around and search for a bite to eat. Their diet is largely insectivorous. They love things like grasshoppers, which they will travel thousands of kilometers across Africa to locate. But they'll also be taking things like frogs, perhaps a little snake, tadpoles, and even fish trapped in puddles. Lovely to see them. They are monogamous, so they do pair off, and they're quite loyal to one another. But whether or not they mate for life is sort of a whole nother discussion. It's commonly thought that things like swans and many of our species of storks and certain eagles, if one of the pair is killed at some stage during the pair's time together, that the other individual will never reproduce again and it'll just live alone until its life ends. I think that might be a bit kind of over dramatized and perhaps not entirely realistic. I think it's vastly more probable that given the opportunity, that bird would probably pair off. But certainly while both birds are alive, they are extremely loyal to one another. And they will stay together all the time. Also sharing the duties of raising a family once a year. a very, very tranquil scene. So the thing that these birds are actually doing at the moment is called preening, the care and maintenance of those feathers, and it is an essential part of their sort of daily duties. They've got a little gland right at the end of their spine, sort of at the top of the base of their tail. It looks like a little pimple if you were to see it right up close. And the function of this gland is to produce a special oil which acts as a conditioner for these feathers. So the bird sort of tickles that gland with the tip of its bill. A tiny, tiny amount of the oil is sort of secreted onto the bill, and then it combs it through those feathers, keeping them in good shape, ensuring that they stick together, and perhaps most critically, that they remain waterproof. Or water repellent anyway. And the feathers don't last forever. The birds do molt annually, but thankfully they don't lose all their feathers at the same time. That would be disastrous, and they kind of lose them in stages, and that ensures that the bird still has the ability to keep itself warm and, perhaps most seriously, has the ability to fly. There will be a turnover of that entire set of feathers once a year. And they regenerate a bit like quills. They look like porcupine quills when they erupt. They've got kind of a see-through casing that breaks away slowly as the feather grows, and then kind of the fringes erupt from it. The bird combs everything into place, and it's got a new feather. It's pretty fascinating that our now modern understanding of migratory patterns of birds actually came from the stork. Not specifically the woolly-necked stork, but rather the European stork, and specifically one individual that was found, if I'm not mistaken, in a part of Germany. So that individual woolly-necked, or rather European stork, was seen at a time when it was believed that birds disappearing from Europe as Europe moved into winter were probably going into the sea. And that's as little as 100 years ago. Leading bird experts thought that was what was happening. But this woolly-necked stork pitched up in Europe with an African arrow through its breast. It had flown nearly 5,000 kilometers like that, and it led to the understanding that birds fly very, very far. And I believe that that European stork was unfortunately shot, but it can now be seen in a museum somewhere, still with that sort of tribal African arrow through its breast. Pretty fascinating. And if I may say, quite mind-blowing that it managed to fly all of that way with that arrow that looks like it must be about 4 feet long through its body. We live and learn. Lady Macbeth, definitely. This does seem to be a pretty reliable spot when it comes to birding. and certainly very regular sightings of these magnificent woolies here. Now, these woolly-necked storks are seasonal breeders, and as with many other members of their sort of greater family, they breed kind of through the wet season in southern Africa, between August and December, with a peak from September to November. Zane, you've asked a very good question. Do any birds follow elephants in the same way that oxpeckers do antelope? Oh, check that woolly-necked stork out. Trying to sun the underside of his wings there in that very, very, very funny looking pose. Back to your question, Zane. So not quite in the same sense that that oxpeckers will hang on things like a rhino or a giraffe. But ellies are certainly followed by birds that feed on the insects that are kind of scared up in their wake as they move through long grass. So in some parts of Africa you will get cattle egrets actually sitting on the backs of ellies, but far more common to simply see them running in the grass ahead of or behind an elephant feeding. And yeah, even things like carmine bee-eaters, the beautiful, very red-coloured bee-eater, and relying on that elephant's big, heavy footsteps to sweep up tasty morsels out of long grass. A nice little symbiosis. And I guess to some degree that bird perhaps keeps an eye out for danger. That truly is a very, very funny pose. Again, just trying to get a bit of sun, I believe, on the undersides of those wings. Obviously, exposure to ultraviolet rays helps with the synthesis of vitamin D3, which is pretty critical in the formation of bones, the health of skin. All sorts of things. Yeah, certainly very good for humans as well to get out into the sun for at least a couple of minutes every day. Not excessively, but I believe something like 15 minutes every day. Very, very good for you. Good for your immunity too. Jive Bunny has said nothing like a tasty tick. Jive Bunny, I don't know so much for you or me, but certainly for something like an oxpecker, tick is a very tasty thing. So ticks on the bodies of things like rhinos, giraffe, buffalo, even warthogs, are little blood-filled organisms, a little explosion of protein for something like a lucky oxpecker. Kaylin has said that woolly-necked stork was posing like a Zara model. Yeah, certainly something quite interesting. interesting to look at, not something we see every day. You see it with things like the vultures as well, particularly on a very chilly morning. It's a wonderful way to defrost. They do also have patches of naked skin under the wings, possibly some of their only bare skin across their entire body. So nice to have that come into contact with direct sun. Probably the most efficient way of getting that sun exposure. Found something tasty there, possibly a nice grasshopper or a frog. Yeah, what a pleasure it is for me to be back here at Live at the Waterhole after such an absence. We are moving kind of into the final quarter of today's show. But yeah, it gives me great pleasure to say I'll be with you tomorrow and the next day as well. And then back in the middle of April, I think I've got something like 10 of these Live at the Waterhole shows booked. So yeah. At least remotely getting a bit of bush exposure, and it's been such a pleasure to chat to so many of you today. Thanks very much for all of the questions. Sanjeev Roy has sent a comment. Yesterday I learnt a very sad story of a female Namibian desert elephant who lost 3 consecutive babies of her own. First was born too weak and died. Second survived till it accidentally fell from a hill. That's very, very sad, Sanjeev. Especially when we think about how intense the bond between mother and calf is with an elephant. And they are such emotional animals. We know that the females in particular grieve very, very intensely. So that is quite a sad thing to hear. The beauty, though, is that female elephants are absolute baby-making machines. They breed throughout their lives. So while the loss of a calf or even multiple calves is extremely tragic and very, very tough for that cow to deal with, she will almost certainly have the chance to breed again. And they do make such good mums. Yeah, there's a lot of science to suggest, even with our limited knowledge of the human brain, that elephants have sectors of the brain, in particular sectors in the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe, of course, being responsible for emotional capacity that humans don't even have. So it's not too much of a stretch of the imagination to say that they feel things like grief even more intensely than we do. So yeah, very sad indeed. Itzy, thank you very much for the welcome and the luck. Yeah, I'm certainly going to need it for my last 2 or so exams, but the end is in sight. And I'm looking forward to doing a bit of work with WildEarth in the coming months, hopefully a bit more of this Live at the Waterhole, and with some luck, maybe even a stint or 2 at Djuma now that WildEarth is not going to Pridelands anymore. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting back out into the real world. My studies have been for a purpose, so I've been able to motivate on that condition. But yeah, I really have missed bush time. Alrighty, well, once again, in the interest of keeping things flowing, I think let's head back up to Olifants West Game Reserve outside the town of Hoedspruit to see what's happening up there. Magnificent. Okay. I don't actually recognize this camera, so that's another first for me. But I do know this reserve extremely well. Olifants West is a beautiful part of the world, and as its name suggests, a wonderful group of elephants in the shade of what looks like a sycamore fig tree. And they do look like bulls. I think this is a bachelor group with at least 3 there. I wonder if there's not some water in that dip. Possibly not. They might be just feeding on grass or something. Oh, and then there were 4. Quite small bulls on the right there. Those 2 smaller individuals, so you'd be forgiven for thinking that these are calves and that this is a breeding herd. But both of these bulls are teenagers. They're sort of past the beginning of puberty, and at this stage, by the looks of it, living in a bachelor group setting, which is all quite normal. So they're born into very tightly structured natal groups, headed up by a very dominant matriarch. But essentially, when those young bulls get to the age of puberty, very similarly to people, around the age of about 13, perhaps a little bit earlier, perhaps a little bit later, and their testosterone starts to spike, with it kind of encouraging reproductive interest in female family members. The adult cows take that opportunity to start pushing those young bulls out. There are no permanent male family members in an elephant breeding herd. But being elephants, they're highly social, and they do need to live in a group setting. They need sort of physical contact and I guess, emotional interaction. I guess a bit like people do as well. So the bulls gravitate towards one another, and these bachelor groups are formed. Often all centered around one very large, experienced male, and he kind of mentors and governs them as they turn into young men. It's absolutely a culture. Very, very nice to see. And yeah, I've said it so many times on this Live at the Waterhole show, but I'll say it again. It's so wonderful to view these ellies out in the wild, and we see them interacting like this. I've just explained sort of a tiny segment of their social lives and the importance of that social structure to their well-being. Now keep all of that in mind when you look at an elephant in captivity. In particular, an elephant that's kept alone. That really is a very, very sorry existence indeed. Much like us that do suffer from depression, they get very, very bored, and often that has horrible effects on them physically, mentally, emotionally. And they do not belong in captivity at all. If you want to see ellies, you should be seeing them in the wild. Kaylin, thanks very much for your comment. They are beautiful, gentle giants. Yeah, I can spend literally the entire day quite happily sat with a group of elephants. And they give me an enormous sense of peace. A beautiful rhythmic flapping of ears for those individuals off on the right there. An adult elephant has something like 450 liters of blood in its body. But quite amazingly, that entire blood supply passes through that elephant's ears under pretty immense pressure in about 20 minutes. So a couple of minutes spent flapping those ears is a remarkably effective way at reducing their body temperature. They do, after all, not have the ability to sweat. So another means of reducing that body temperature, in particular on a scorching afternoon such as this, is a critical element to their well-being as well. Jive Bunny, thanks for your comment. You say you love Olifants. Yeah, this is a very special part of the world. Yeah, I wasn't even aware WildEarth had access to another camera down here. I wonder if it's not attached to Enkoveni Camp, I think. It's down here on the water. Over the years, I've had some incredible sightings down here along the Olifants River. In an earlier segment, I mentioned sightings of Pell's fishing owls. Olifants West, quite amazingly, actually had a pair of Pell's fishing owls breeding in a sycamore fig tree down here along the river. Now, if you are a birder, that's one of the top coveted species, a bucket list species of bird to see. And we were blessed with very regular, almost daily sightings of Pells. One of the nicest sightings, a pair of adult birds actually teaching a young fledged chick or sub-adult to fish. Pretty mind-blowing. I think it was probably some behavior that's never been seen. Lady Macbeth says, also a huge resident baboon troop here. I can believe you, Lady Macbeth. Those sycamore fig trees that line both banks of the Olifants provide an absolutely perfect place for those baboons to roost, as well as a source of food. Definitely the right sort of country for things like baboon. Also very, very good leopard sightings down here. Good prides of lions on the riverbank. Yeah, this Olifants West area has a very, very firm place in my heart. It's a wonderful place to visit. Lots of ellies. Nice elephant trumpet there, and a bit of a greater look at the river itself. The river flows year round and cuts west to east directly through this kind of low-veld wilderness region. It cuts into the southern reaches of the Limpopo National Park in Mozambique, and drains into the Massingeira Dam through a spectacular gorge filled with crocodiles, where I was fortunate to be an anti-poaching pilot for much of last year. I think that might be a crocodile, maybe just a rock. Yeah, I think just a rock. Something in the river there somewhere. This area is home to an absolutely mammoth population of Nile crocodiles, certainly some of the biggest I've ever seen. But that might be a hippo down there, also possibly just a rock. But yeah, these crocs in this Olifants River system were affected by a horrible sort of spate of poisonings, which were very much unexplained for a number of years. It was then realized that a mining operation to the north was dumping toxins into this river. Yeah, that hippo is just in the top right corner, kind of on the water's edge. And yeah, it was really, really horrible. I think this was about 8 or 9 years ago. These toxins were affecting the muscles in the crocodile's tails. So gradually, these large reptiles were losing the ability to swim, and were just sort of slowly being paralyzed. Thankfully, I think scientists managed to test a lot of the bodies, and eventually some sort of solution was put into place, because we're not seeing it anymore. And then we experienced a massive flood in 2013 when the crocodile population was quite debilitated, in which a neighboring crocodile farm was actually flooded, and something like 15,000 crocodiles were actually lost into the Olifants River. Great news for those crocs, who I'm sure were destined for the meat and leather market. So, yeah, I guess nature got some of its crocs back. And certainly in my time flying anti-poaching in Limpopo National Park, we saw lots and lots of very well established crocs in the furthest end of that Olifants River, breeding quite happily each year. So they have made a comeback. Definitely something splashing in the river. I think it might be Ellie's drinking, but I think it is perhaps out of view of our camera. Yeah, maybe around one of these bends. Thankfully, this river does flow year-round, so it pumps a watery lifeline through much of this wilderness without fail, even through the driest periods. Now, once again, water is life, and certainly for the many lodges in these areas trying to sustain ecotourism businesses, water brings in wildlife. So yeah, a wonderful place to operate. And as mentioned, an area that I personally operated game drives in for 2 or 3 of the earliest years of my career. Something swimming across the river there. It might be a smallish croc or a monitor lizard, kind of in the shade of those big trees on the opposite side. And those big trees are the home of the Pell's fishing owl. I can actually see a couple of, I think, vultures taking off there. Also a favoured nesting spot of the white-backed and the hooded vultures. Those large trees offering thick enough branches to actually support the weight of those massive birds. During my time guiding here on Olifants West, we had a single pride of lions, the Ottawa pride, or rather the Singwe pride. The Ottawas are in the Sabi Sands. And anyway, one day the river was quite low, and the entire Singwe pride, complete with one large male, a number of cubs, a couple of lionesses, swam across the river to a hunting conservancy on the other side. Which was obviously quite devastating. We had access to no other lions. So anyway, a number of the lodges mobilized the team, a helicopter, veterinarian, and the funds to tranquilize them. Tranquilized these lions, brought them back to safety. Very, very happy. We all managed to get one sighting of them on an afternoon drive, after which these lions promptly swam straight back over the river again. So a testament to nature doing what nature wants to do. Thankfully, they were out for a number of weeks, but they ended up coming back on their own without having lost any members of that pride to the hunters on the other side. As I say, a couple of weeks later. There's that hippo. So just enjoying a bit of a break in the shallows there. just a single hippo by the looks of things, quite arguably a bull. So each section of river, probably 1 kilometer or 2 long, is governed by one large river master, one large chieftain, a dominant bull, and he'll have a pod of cows, a pod of females and calves, and he will defend the right to live in that river and to mate with those females with his life. And the bulls fight brutally with their tusks, often inflicting such horrendous damage that one bull in the fight, or possibly both, will actually die. But essentially that's all comes down to the theory of survival of the fittest, and the strongest genes being allowed to proliferate. Hello, Darkman Lover. Nice to hear from you as well. Always nice to hear a familiar voice. Great to be back, and I certainly hope to be back in the driver's seat at WildEarth, as well as doing a bit more of this live at the Waterhole stuff as we go. So stay tuned. It has certainly been a very exciting day here at Live at the Waterhole. A nice variety. And I'm really looking forward to doing a couple more of these shows this week. So let's see what happens. But as ever, tune in same time tomorrow for more wildlife content through the middle of the day. It's certainly never a dull day. But yeah, unfortunately, I believe we've only got about 60 seconds left for this afternoon. Of course, the sunset safari will be going ahead as per normal, but from myself and directors Tadiwa for the first half and Tulu for the second, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you all on board with us, and we hope to see you for a bit more wildlife content tomorrow. But wherever you are out there, I hope you're having a wild afternoon. And thank you very much. And we'll chat to you soon.
Well, a very good afternoon to everybody. Once again, thanks for joining us on our highlight show. And yes, we are coming here directly from Juma Private Game Reserve in the Sabi Sands. And my name is Cedric. And behind the camera with me, we've got Muscles and Paul. So, yes, if it's your first time joining us on this highlight show, and for the next half an hour, we are going to discuss exactly what we've been seeing over the last 24 hours. Yesterday's sunset safari, as well as this morning's sunrise safari. So yes, I'm looking forward to that. But this is